In this episode of Arts and Offers, we're going to be talking about how a poetry conference that we have upcoming is going to help you with your own growth and development as a poet, but also as a presenter. And they get a production of themselves being able to discuss it in a situation in which they're the leader, they're a facilitator. We're also going to be talking about how can you reach people with your poetry that aren't just poets.
We're not looking for, poetry film festivals, which there are a few, right? So we have submitted to a few. But the thing that we're looking for is really things around like mothers and daughters and like.
As you try out these different techniques, an important thing to remember too is that whatever you're starting with is actually one of your credentials. There's a huge advantage to having the perspective of a beginner in something too, because you get someone that's too far along in the game, they've forgotten what it's like. We're going to close off with 5 pieces of advice for anyone considering turning their poetry into film.
Okay, so you are a poet and you're trying to figure out how your poetry can exist beyond just the page. You're thinking about the ways that your audience can engage your work that isn't just picking up a book or reading it online. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is Diverse's Arts and Offers.
I
got it. Look at that. I get it right. My name is Matthias, and I'm sitting here with the curator and creator of Diverse's, one only Geoff Anderson.
Hey,
how's it going, Geoff?
We're good. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How was your weekend, and more specifically Sunday?
Yes. So in Columbus, there was the poetry festival that was organized by Larry. So kudos to him. Yes. Getting the project done. Yeah, I thought we said we were going to do together, but there's another one.
There's another one. Wait, is it that? No, it's this one.
Oh wow!
Yeah. What is it? Shout out Larry.
You
get the good one.
That is a good one. Yeah. So and he invited me to lead a workshop. So we led a little workshop talking about some techniques to create a scene that everyone remembers. And it's based around the text, The Art of Subtext by Charles Baxter. So talking about things related to plot, increasing tension, understanding character motivations. And the more you're able to kind of lean into those things, the more you're able to create scenes that actually have impact.
Yeah, and it was cool because, I mean, there's like a kind of almost like a meta kind of viewscape that I was able to have kind of with the experience. I was at the poetry festival last year, like the inaugural one that was last year, and being able to see you again kind of in this space, being able to kind of teach like more like presenting like a class in a way that you do a lot with Diverses as a platform just in general. I think you're able to kind of implement a lot of the things that you talk about with other people as far as like how to talk about your work or how to talk about things and like specifically around your work, and really being able to see people in the audience or that were like in the class kind of taking it in and kind of talking about ways that they can use it in their own work was really cool. So it was a good experience. Shout out to Larry for the second go round of the festival. Definitely looking forward to naturally seeing it growing into next year too.
Yeah. He's very big on kind of paying attention to the little details with relation to like branding, how it's appearing online, the posting. He is like a set schedule, like, hey, we have to do this post on this day, this post on this day. So kind of just like think about all those little nitty gritty details, which I appreciate because not everyone's always considering those sorts of things.
Yeah, and it's like, I think when you talk about every other kind of business, people are really like hyper vigilant on things like that, or they're at the very least aware that they should be hyper vigilant on it. You know what I mean? But whenever it comes to art, for some reason, people are just like, just go with the flow, kind of do your own thing, kind of figure it out, or like don't make any efforts to kind of learn from kind of established patterns that you already kind of see available, or really even paying attention to your own patterns and seeing what works. So it's really cool that somebody is, serious enough about poetry and about kind of making sure that poetry is pushed. There's like a festival around it. There's like energy around it that they're actually paying attention to stuff like that, which is also, naturally perfectly ties into kind of, naturally what's going to be coming up this weekend too. I know we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, but naturally what you're doing with the conference this weekend, which you're also, incredibly intentional about who you're bringing on, how they're presenting, how people are talking about the conference. So, I mean, yeah, it's just really good that, poetry is being given that kind of time and attention in Columbus.
Yeah, and I think that it also speaks to, I think, our central topic for today, because the ultimate thing is we're talking about, bringing our work to life in multiple formats, and being able to introduce people to our work in multiple different ways. And so, like Matthias mentioned, this weekend we're hosting Columbus's first, at least based on what I know of, first poetry conference. There's been writing conferences.
We got to push the button for that.
Right one, yeah. I don't think Columbus has had a poetry-specific conference, and let's change that, because I think a lot of times we see poetry lumped in with other art forms or just writing in general, but there's nothing that's just purely poetry. That's all you're going to get is just talks related to poetry. So
yeah,
I'm excited to host that, and it's also very much in the kind of similar vein with the festival. In terms of prep, our facilitators, we've had 2 workshops just talking about how to lead a workshop. People had to send in proposals. We talked about people's proposals. There's specific flyers for each presentation. The registration came out in stages, like everything. There's a lot of kind of intentional aspects to this. And for the facilitators, the advantage that they have is that these workshops are going to be recorded. They'll be posted on the Diverses platform, so they get not only their own art, but also their own takes on art and things that they find valuable in art. And they get a production of themselves being able to discuss it in a situation in which they're the leader, they're the facilitator, right? It's all about them. Yeah. So it puts them as in a position of authority, and a position where they can then talk to other people and say, hey, I've led this workshop. In fact, I can show you that I've led it. Here's the actual social proof. And the workshops are small because our venue's small. If you're watching this on video, it's really not much larger than what you see on screen. But I think that actually gives us advantages in a lot of ways. So intimate workshops, a lot of dedicated attention to the people that are going to be attending, and it gives us an idea of numbers like in a much more predictable way, because we can already see, okay, like these workshops are small. A lot of workshops are already, especially the earlier ones, are almost fully booked. There's like 2 or 3 seats left for a lot of them. So if you're watching this and you're in Columbus and you want one, please register soon, because the guaranteed seats are almost out. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for just being able to give poets more opportunities. It's been interesting with the Verses, because it's certainly, in trying to grow it, it is less time for my own art. But what that enables me to do is it has enabled so much more art from other people.
100%. I also think about that when it comes to, whenever you see a speaker, or you see somebody that's like giving like, really like large like platform performances and things like that. You're always thinking about like that kind of like that larger platform first. Like you're thinking about them in this like really large, like huge capacity. And a lot of these artists that you're bringing in that have created a course and are going to like kind of be speaking this coming up weekend, they're not people that maybe necessarily have like a huge amount of experience in doing this. But it's like, in order to kind of see yourself at that larger step, you have to be able to have a platform in a way to be effective in these, like in this kind of space. And just like and the same thing when it comes to the trajectory of an artist, like you're hoping that the artist will be able to come in and they'll be able to affect a smaller space, and then a larger, then a larger, then a larger as their space grows. Same thing with Diverses. I mean, Diverses, you start out just in just in your office at your house. I won't tell you guys where his house is. I'll just post it later. But you can, that way you can visit the original offices. Versus
It's part of the tour.
it's part of it's part of take one souvenir on your way out. But yeah, so I mean, we started there, and then there was the location around the corner. Now, this location, and naturally things are gonna grow. And that's coinciding with the size of the online platform in and of itself, right? And I think about that because just I think a lot of times artists are really hesitant to kind of jump into this sphere and jump into this space where they're giving their takes, they're giving their expertise, they're talking about their tastes when it comes to poetry, their tastes when it comes to creating a platform and building their art. And you'll see a large difference. The biggest difference, I think, and a lot of those people, the larger platforms and the ones that are kind of are the smaller platforms, is just them being courageous enough to say well, these are my takes now. This is what I believe. These are the things that work for me that I believe can work. And you kind of stand by those takes and you kind of move along with those, but ultimately it's you have to start somewhere and you have to believe that you're starting somewhere. And it's really cool that a lot of these speakers are going to kind of get that opportunity in this space. And a big part of that is really being able to be effective in a couple different, or more than just one modality when it comes to poetry. And kind of what we're just talking about today, just this idea that a lot of people are really apprehensive about outside of the page, what happens next with my poem, and what happens next with my work in general. And typically my answer to that is everything. Everything should happen with your poem now. Now that you feel like your poem is done in this platform, in this capacity, the next thing is whatever. So, okay, you don't have any visuals for your poem yet. Well, there's a lot of people that they might not pick up a chapbook necessarily, but YouTube is we talk about this all the time. YouTube is huge. It's pretty much a necessary download for every smartphone. And even if you don't have your own kind of YouTube profile, you probably reference YouTube a ton. It's a file sharing service, which as much as anything. So, even if you aren't necessarily putting things on a platform so they can be shared out broadly, if somebody wants an example of your work, or for another kind of different opportunity, you can kind of share them, something with a YouTube link. So yeah, just video to me is a really kind of important kind of component, and really creating intentional visuals for your art is able to kind of curate and create a really broader message to a broader audience.
Can you elaborate on that broader audience aspect?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, really good example. We went to we created a short film around my wife's work, around a couple poems from my wife's work, and now with that, it's they're poems, but they're poems that are kind of if anything Ajane Dawkins, so much of her work is around the mother-daughter, or the matrilineal relationship between generations, generational thing. And so much of her work being around that, and she talked about this a little bit. She is a professor at Otterbein, and she had an event where she talked about, and it was actually a quote from Geoff, or loosely a quote from Geoff, where she was saying a lot of times people will say poetry is for the poets, right? So they're communicating poetry is for the poets. But nobody ever says that about music. Nobody ever says that about novels and fiction and things like that. And definitely nobody says that about film, right? People are everybody can enjoy film. You can kind of communicate messages, and people can sit down and watch a movie and enjoy it fairly readily and fairly accessible. And it's fairly accessible. So no, these films were created But when we're submitting out to film festivals and we're trying to reach kind of an audience in that way, we're not looking for, poetry film festivals, which there are a few, right? So we have submitted to a few. But the thing that we're looking for is really things around like mothers and daughters and like in women and things like that. And the reason is because it's like, yes, they are poems, but they are poems that convey this message. And like this is the audience that you're trying to reach. You're not trying to, say like, hey, all poets come watch my movies. You're saying that like the people that I am talking to is this demographic. And I think this demographic is going to be really intensely affected by this work. So yeah, it's that film aspect. I mean, you'll poetry on the page. I always recommend, if you can get your hands on a book, definitely get your hands on a book. Bloodflex is out through New Delta Review. But ultimately, something that is, as I would definitely say, more accessible, or it'll be far more accessible once it's actually out in public. Right now, it's just in the film festival circuit, but something that is more accessible is being able to have like a 17-minute short film that kind of gives you all these messages and it gives you the work in kind of this different vehicle. And I think, and again, it's more accessible to a larger amount of people, but it's also, again, it's doing the work of not just trying to say like, hey, poets come to this open mic, poets come to this show. It's saying like, this is like a video presentation that, is going to span far wider, especially when you add in, we have like captions and subtitles for like different languages as well.
Mm-hmm. It's like when you're submitting to like these like film festivals, are they specifically poetry film festivals, or are they just kind of general film festivals?
General film festivals, yeah. I'll say this. So there are 3 film festivals that are strictly that we've submitted it out to so far that are just poetry film festivals. But that's 3, and I think I've submitted How to Witness a Miracle to 24, 25 film festivals. So the far larger amount of the film festivals that I'm submitting it out to are just general film festivals.
So let's kind of just like thinking about this, because again, like you mentioned, the general reader of poems is poets. So let's talk a little bit about film festivals. I have not been to a film festival. So like, who are the people that go to film festivals?
It kind of, it's interesting. It kind of depends on the demo. There are some communities that have and it's typically like much like smaller communities. So there's one in Baltimore that because you can kind of go on through like their profile and kind of see the people that kind of go and the people that frequent. And some of them will have like a really large amount of filmmakers, like local filmmakers in the area. But there's a lot of them that are like, a film festival is like kind of like a really big deal for their community. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, somebody's coming through and they're showing like a whole gambit of films, and it'll be a thing that families will come out to. It'll be a thing that like groups of friends, they'll be like, oh, this is like a kind of a cool thing. These films aren't like just, films that you're going to see in like, like these like large big budget movie theaters, like large big budget movies. Like these are like independent filmmakers, and people kind of make it their business to kind of stay up to date on stuff like that. So it kind of depends on, I would say, the community. A good example, actually, in Thrive is a film festival that is traveling. Actually, they're traveling right now. I want to say they're in Chicago right now, but they were in Columbus last week, and I went there. And the organizers, naturally, they're all filmmakers. But there was, I want to say about 40 or 50 people there at the screening that I was at. And unless they're hiding something that I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think most of them were filmmakers. You know what I mean? I think most of them were just, people that were interested. They were actually interested in the topic, which is, like in Thrive is they're all films by formerly incarcerated persons, right? And so it's about like, like advocacy in that direction. So I think a lot of the people that were there were people that were interested in the advocacy that the films are leaning towards, and not necessarily they are not filmmakers.
Mm-hmm. Which I think speaks to the need to, and I was actually talking about this last night. So last night we had a Poet Business Institute workshop talking about kind of creating your poetry identity. And and again, this is something that if your goal is just making your art for yourself, then really all these discussions that we're having, you know, they may not be relevant for you, right?
Yeah.
But if you're someone that's interested in actually, taking your art, doing something impactful with it to other people, not purely for yourself, part of having that kind of poetry identity is kind of saying like, okay, what does my work kind of align with? Like, what's the mission here? Like, one of the things I was talking about was, a lot of poets align themselves kind of like with a political mission, or a lot of poets align themselves with some sort of advocacy, or a lot of poets align themselves with, some common thread. And it's not to say that like necessarily all the poems are on that topic, but it is something that like if you talk to the poet, it's a theme that repeatedly comes up.
Yeah.
And as soon as we can start incorporating that identity, so we're not just a poet, we're a poet who talks about blank, or we're a poet who's associated with blank. We start that process of kind of self-selection, people being able to identify like, yes, I agree with this too, or no, I disagree with it. Because another part of this too is also kind of like your enemy. Like, what is your work against? I am for this, I am against this. And the more we allow people to kind of resonate with the message or be turned off by the message, the more like of an emotional connection people are going to be able to have with our work. And once you align with that, then whether it's through like film or like film festivals, but it can also be with like different groups in the community being like, okay, I am poetry and blank. There's probably a group that aligns with the blank. I am poetry and dealing with issues related to incarceration, right? So now you can get involved with those groups related to incarceration. Like, for instance, maybe there's a film festival dedicated to it, and that allows you to get your work out to people who can be impacted by it. But if you just stuck with poetry, wouldn't have been able to find it.
Yeah. And because poetry is like how do I put this? Like, poetry is not necessarily, it's not a subject, right? It's a vessel. It's like the way that you're communicating a subject. And so a lot of times people get really wrapped up in the ability to be a poet and not necessarily what they're talking about as a poet, which also leads them to, you see the generalities both in the individual work itself, because now it's, we've all came across either like the poems, maybe we've made them, you know what I mean? I'm pretty sure I definitely made them at some point, where like the poem is about everything, so it's really about nothing. You know what I mean? I don't have enough room in the poem to really dig deep into any one thing. I'm just being like really, really general about everything. And the thing that leaves the viewer or the listener or the reader with is like this just very general, like, okay, you talked about a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of times it's like you're making yourself kind of like the consummate good guy on all different subjects, and so he's like you're like giving your personal commentary on politics and social issues and all that other stuff, and you're kind of explaining how great maybe you are. This is just an example, but like it happens a lot, right? So like, you cover a whole bunch of ground, but because you covered a whole bunch of ground, like you didn't cover any one thing specifically, and then you kind of get that through the breadth of people's work as well. So to the point where it's like, okay, like, I get that you have a lot of things that you want to say and a lot of things that you want to talk about, and that's actually not bad. But it's also like, because you don't have any kind of focus, like, okay, I wouldn't go to you for any one thing. You know what I mean? There are some people that if I am thinking of, poems about nature, like I'm like, oh, like this is, there's a lot of poets like that, but this is a poet that I'm familiar with their work that I'm like, I know if I want to go to like nature imagery or like the carceral system, or like politics around, like, like geopolitics or anything like that. Like there's like poets that I'm like confident that you can like kind of lean on their work for that. But yeah, just when you're non-specific, you're kind of giving yourself a box that you can't really be effective.
And I think a lot of poets and artists in general sometimes kind of like bristle at these notions because they're like, oh, I just want to make my art and let the art be what it wants, which is fine.
Yeah.
But I think that you can have it both ways. I think you could be like, I want to create art centered around this theme, but that's still, I have freedom within that theme. Where restraint isn't a restriction. Like it opens things up. It's just another form in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I also think about like there's a lot of like, so even when we think about like authors, there's a lot of authors that are really well known for one specific genre, so much so that when they create in a different genre, they use like a different name. They use a pseudonym because they're like, well, I don't want to divide my brand that's so strong in this direction. I don't want to divide it into anything else. And the reason for, I mean, again, like that's, that's not like a necessity for every writer, but what it is it makes sure that, hey, if I'm going to this writer or this author for this thing, like I know what I'm going to get. I know what to expect. And there's like a reliability in your audience kind of takes from that kind of lets them kind of stick with you.
But I also think this also gives your art a little bit more of a direction and intentionality and a strategy, because it's like, okay, like if you talk to a lot of the major poets, like I was like talking when I was at Cali, like Greg Pardlow or like Vivie Francis, like project-based work, it's like even before they started writing the poems, they've already decided like, hey, I'm going to make a chapbook, and the chapbook's going to be centered around this theme.
Yeah.
And I think a similar thing with our art, if we're thinking about, for instance, like film in this case, but it's film, but it's not just film. It's like whatever it may be. Taking a moment to really think about like, okay, I want to write this poem, and before we even get the poem down, or maybe we're halfway done with the poem, then we can kind of start thinking, okay, this poem is doing this. What are all the different things I can now do with this? I can create the film. I can create the stills for the film. I was listening to some people. They were talking about social media strategy. It was like a fashion. They're talking about like a fashion company. And they made like a short film to showcase all the fashion and stuff like that, which is cool. But then like incorporate with all the short film, they created stills like for each fashion icon, and like the stills came in different series. So like they had like a casual series, like almost like seeing the fashion work in like streetwear. But then they also had like a formal like black and white series too, like a more changing the setting and things like that. And you can incorporate like interviews and stuff like that. So suddenly like one, if I'm a fashion designer, one piece of clothing can suddenly, I can make like thousands of pieces of like graphics and, films and conversations about one thing, and imagine if we approached every single poem that we wrote or whatever piece of art that we created with the same level of intensity and focus. Because a lot of us, when we write the poem's done. We're moving on to the next thing. But the other thing we need to realize too is that, your poem's never old. Your poem's new, because your poem's going to be seen by less than like 0.1% of the world. So it's always going to be new to someone.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that too, just like and I'm kind of like delving back into kind of what we're talking about when it comes to like poetry and film. Nothing will really sharpen your focus in creating a poem, for me at least. So I'll just speak for myself, in creating a poem, than like thinking about the film as I'm writing the poem, or as I'm like creating whatever the core of the body of the work is. Because as soon as you start trying to figure out the visuals for it, you start realizing like, man, did I really go off of a trail trying to write this poem? Because again, you're trying to put together a film. If you're trying to put together like these visuals, you're really able to see kind of tangibly in real time, in real space, like, okay, what am I trying to show? what am I trying to say through these visuals? And if I really went off the rails in my poem somewhere, like I'm going to be able to reveal it kind of really easily there. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, I mean, we're in talks, right? Like we're talking, we're building things up right now to kind of be more intentional about kind of bringing poetry films into, naturally into Columbus, or as a very kind of consistent metric, because that's also kind of another part of it. I think that a lot of times we're thinking about poetry films and we're thinking about like, it takes kind of like a $10,000 budget to make anything, and I'm like, not really. You know what I mean? Like you can. There's some very simple things that you can do to kind of create a poetry film and really kind of iron out like what you want your poetry film to do and to be. And ultimately it just takes like a poet and probably your phone. You know what I mean? Like you could for a lot of people, you could just use your phone and you could kind of get some pretty decent visuals. But yeah, I mean, there's so many advantages, just like you said, like if you have like a good enough camera that you can pull stills off of. We just recently did a poetry as kind of film, where shout out to Geoff. Geoff was so a lot of y'all, you should know this. Everybody that's on this platform, everyone on this platform should know this. But like Geoff speaks fluent Italian, right? It's like
me la cavo.
But so it's like, this was actually like a really cool like realization, because like I was like talking to my wife Ajane, and like I was like talking about like, man, like I really wanted to get into some of these like foreign film festivals. I wanted to do kind of this like monochromatic style kind of film noir kind of concepts and things like that. And I was just like, man, like, but I want to write like the piece, but I don't really know the language, or I don't know like most, they're French or Italian, one of them, either like they kind of like whatever it is. But I was like, but I do know somebody that does know like Italian. And so we're able to naturally kind of do that film, which I don't know, it'll be out, it'll be in some film festival at some point. But it's all just to say that there's probably people both in your community and things that you can people that you can lean on to kind of help. I know like Diverse is a really good platform for kind of building things up in naturally with your poetry career, and kind of elements that you can use to kind of support yourself as a poet. And yeah, like that video, like poetry visual is such a great way to be like, maybe maybe my book right now is not reaching out to this person, but let me try the video. Let me see if this film that I'm sending out, like, let's see if that reaches my audience. And then a lot of times what people do, they'll double back to the poetry book. They'll be like, oh man, like how do I get my hands on the actual literature? So, yeah, you can kind of have that dual interest thing going.
And I think that it can be intimidating with video to start off, because you may not have cameras and mics, you may just have a phone and things like that. But
yeah,
whatever you're used to start with is already your credential, because that's something that you can actually use to your advantage. I think a lot of times from like a teaching perspective, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I have to get more experience to teach. And it's like, well, no, like there's a huge advantage to having the perspective of a beginner in something too, because you get someone that's too far along in the game, they've forgotten what it's like to be a beginner, or they were a beginner in a very different time frame. Making a video today is very different than when I first started making my own YouTube channel, in like 2017, 2018. There's so many different tools that have come out since then, and my beginner was very different than someone who started off in like the early 2000s, because, I'm using like mirrorless cameras and stuff like that. DSLRs, they're a little bit more technical, like the older cameras and things. There's different. All that to say, there is always new value, even from a beginner's perspective. There's also value, for instance, from an equipment perspective. Like that can actually be something to brag about. Like, look, I made all of this. I made this poetry film on my iPhone.
Yeah.
That some people will specifically watch that video because they want to find out, oh, what does the video actually look like if it's just drawn on an iPhone? Or like, I made this video on my dad's like 1980 video camcorder. You know,
Yeah.
like people will actually just watch that just to see what it looks. So it's like the equipment isn't actually a disadvantage; it's an advantage for if you package it right. It's all about how you're
Yeah.
presenting it. But it's like, whether you're a beginner, like this is my first film. I made my first film in 24 hours. Like people will watch. They might not stay
Crazy.
for that video, but they might check it out just to see it. It can be an asset.
I'm gonna throw this out there, and I usually do not give this person props, and this may not be a prop either.
This is about to be very backhand.
But I'm gonna say this. So somebody like Tyler Perry, who shot a movie in 4 days. I don't recommend having the kind of budget that Tyler Perry has and being like, okay, I'm going to shoot a film in 4 days. That being, or like shoot a film in 4 days with what the film ended up being, right? There's concepts that I think can be shot in 4 days that are better effective, like more effective, if that makes sense. But that being said, it's just that like, a reduction in instrumentation and tools to create your film, not only I think it can work in your advantage when it comes to like your hook or how you're selling it to people or how you're showing people that it kind of gets them interested, but also it's for your learning curve for how you're creating, because if you're somebody who's like I did, everybody puts in their 10,000 hours, but I'm like, if you put in 3,000 hours and you were working with just a cell phone camera, and like that first 3,000 hours is just like you have like I've known when I first started making like short films, I was shooting and editing on my iPhone 7 Plus. Like, I want to be clear, like yes, that iPhone, that I was shooting and editing on that phone. Had a very tough, comparatively very tough time with it, right? But I think one of the things that it was showing me, I mean, I was able to learn like ways to produce kind of like a steady cam that's like outside of body steady cam. I was like had to like schedule and arrange to have like multiple cast people and stuff like that. Communication lines, like scripting and all that other stuff, lighting, and like, so all these things are things that I was learning while having kind of a deficit of tools to kind of operate in, kind of on the other side of the spectrum. And I've told this story on this platform before, but when I first started doing photography, there was a photographer who had been doing photography for like 2 years longer than I had, but his first camera that he got was this like like an incredible, beautiful camera. Like it was a Nikon, but it was like a Nikon. Like, this should not be your first camera. And the reason why it's typically not somebody's first camera is because your first camera is typically whatever camera you can get your hands on. You know what I mean? And he just so happened to, he had access, and there was like somebody that was like selling their camera, and so he was just like, which I want to be clear, go for that. You know what I mean? If somebody is selling their camera at a price that you can get it at, like, go for it. But I'm saying that like, because he didn't, so many things around that camera's operation are things that like are automatic, that he doesn't have to like try, or he doesn't have to kind of figure it out. He never really learned a lot of the things that it takes to really kind of be like that intentional of a photographer. So it took him a little bit longer to kind of get, to improve, because he didn't know what was the camera and what was him. And so what Jim's saying, there are benefits to being like, well, I don't have like a whole bunch of tools at my disposal, but I'm making everything happen with what I have.
Right. Yeah. I think just acknowledging where you are in that journey, and again, that adjust the packaging. Like,
yeah.
Ironically, like I'm thinking from a YouTube perspective. I'm very biased. I do a lot on YouTube. Like, I'm imagining like if I make my very first short film on like an iPhone 7, and like imagine that you shoot the video and you post it on YouTube, and you position it 2 different ways. The first way is you name the title of the video is the title of your short film. And the other way you do it, and maybe like your thumbnail is like a still from the film, and like maybe you add some text with the title from where. Versus the second way is the thumbnail is you holding up the phone you used to shoot the short film, and the title of it is "I made my first film on an iPhone 7." I could be wrong, so you guys can try this experiment out on me. Which video is going to get more views?
The second one.
This is the second one.
Yeah.
Which on one hand is kind of sad because it's like you want people to watch your film and like branding it that way and things like that. But I think the other way, this is the other advantage I think of exploring other mediums is you start understanding people and you start separating yourself from your art and you start understanding the value that people want.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of times when we approach our art, we're approaching our art from a kind of solipsistic, arrogant, like individualistic way, our own lens, our own bias. This is what my art means to me. But as soon as you start incorporating other people and presenting work to them, it's no longer about you, and it suddenly becomes a lot more important to understand what's the value people get from my art. You know, and the thing that people get from the art in this example with these two titles and thumbnails is, people see that you made the film, but people are curious to see what's possible with this camera. You know,
that's a much larger. I would say like a much larger demo than people that have all of the elements and tools. I mean, typically than people that have all the elements and tools that you have is like people that are trying to figure out, okay, how can I get there, or how can I figure out how to make that, especially when we're talking about like even like diverses as a mission, like how do I go from being, I'm just writing things personally for myself in my notebook to how do I then become somebody who has a brand and multiple pieces of like either like work or materials that they can use to build a life off of their work. Like most people don't have the rest of that. They just have a plan, or they just have like a thought that it's possible. And I was thinking about like maybe like 5 pieces of advice for like kind of either getting into and creating poetry films.
Sure.
And I had a couple. I don't know if you have a couple in mind.
You riff. Oh no.
Okay. So the very first thing that I would say is so outside of, I mean we can kind of make it simple. The poem. I think a lot of times it's like I don't want to make it like too like difficult, but I feel like having the poem or having whatever like piece that you really want to reach the world in film kind of has to happen first. And so we I put out a post on my Instagram, and I was like, hey, does anybody have a poem about water? Because I was like working on like a short film that kind of incorporated water. And I was like, man, does anybody have a poem about water? And I realized, I was like, okay, like, well, I don't have a poem about water. And like, if I was like, I really want to like make this film happen, could I make it happen? Or could I really kind of devote myself to kind of like pushing this concept? And so, yeah, just ultimately like, first things first, like the poem, the piece, whatever it is that you want to make the film around, like, I think it's important to have that base first. And then that way you can kind of develop things outside of that.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
I mean, it's the launching pad, right? Like, it's because it's, and maybe poetry is not your medium. Whatever is your primary medium, starting off with that primary medium. That's also probably going to be a thing you're most passionate about to start with as well. Right?
Yeah. Second thing, and this is actually something that I'm very concerned with. I think a lot of people's poetry videos that like not a lot. No, let me take that back. I'm concerned that a lot of people don't prioritize this when it comes to their poetry videos, which is the audio for their poetry video. You have no idea how much of a really quick skip something like bad audio can be for your listener. And this goes for, there's certain like film festivals that even have like a certain requirement around audio quality, even like they're a film festival. But I'm like, hey, the audio side of that is really important. There's some really simple, not that expensive ways to kind of get just a quick boost in your audio. They have like lapel mics that you can get Amazon $10. You know what I mean? They have like really small kind of like boom mics that they have like a $26 one on Amazon too. That it's not the greatest thing, but it pushes the audio quality that you're working with up just enough to improve it above, what a lot of people will have was just them kind of maybe talking into their phone's microphone. And again, especially when we're talking about like a poetry video, like the visuals for that, it's a really big turnoff. And so I would always say, do what you can to improve the audio that you're presenting in your film.
There's also just nowadays with AI and stuff like that. There's Adobe Enhance Audio, where if you know nothing about audio correction, it kind of handles the basics for you, like reducing background noise, leveling, and things like that. I will say that it tends to add a lot of bassiness to your voice, so it's not ultimate fix. It's always easier, whether it's on video with like color grading or lighting, or audio, to get that initial like input. The better you can get that, the easier the post processing is in the post production. But if there are issues that come up, there's going to be more tools that help with audio correction. They're going to get better. It's where even if it's just like a slight noise reduction, just spending even just like 5 minutes just adjusting audio, can be significant over time. So pay attention to audio. People will tolerate okay video, but they will really move away from audio that has issues.
Yeah. We ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Cool. So storyboarding. Okay, so in this part of the process, I think is it has to. It can feel boring, but it has to become the fun part for you. I think about, whenever I'm kind of creating a poetry video for really anybody, the storyboarding part, the reason why the storyboarding part is so important is because now I can really communicate clearly like an image that we're going for as like, as a cast, as a group or what have you. And what that really enables you to do is you have the freedom to really experiment within whatever visual that we've already decided, right? So we've already decided this is the angle, this is kind of the thing that we want. So like now what can we build or how can we build on top of that? So many times, this part of the process, a lot of people like kind of skip this part of the process because they just want to get to shooting and they just want to get to like running into things. But what you'll really quickly realize is the real big disadvantage is in post-production. Because now in post-production, you're like trying to look through your images. You're trying to put something together. Now you're trying to stitch it together. But if you had your storyboard and you went by your storyboard when you were shooting, you can always get extra shots on top of your storyboard if something inspires you throughout the course of your video shoot. But if you have your storyboard, then you know the things that you have to get, and then now when you're in post-production, you're able to really kind of clearly see what you were doing during production.
I think when you're like kind of like you're mapping it out or anything out, like those like times where you're like, okay, I have A and B, but I don't know how I'm getting from A to B. You'd be like, oh, I'll just figure it out later. Like, no,
No.
don't do that, please. The same thing, like if you're, so many things. Like if you're teaching, like if you have a class, if you're organizing a class, or like for instance, we're doing our assembly conference, like don't just be like, we'll just wing it from A to B, or it'll work itself out. No, like it's not going to work itself out. Like, as soon as you finish A, you're going to be like, how am I supposed to get to B? And it's not going to become like, it may not be the most exciting part for you, but you're going to feel so much better when you're actually processing it and doing it and shooting it or planning it or running it, whatever it is. So when you actually just map, just like visualize it. And the more you can visualize it, the more you can see it. If you can see it, you can do it.
Yeah.
And if you're like you're trying to map things out and it's foggy, you need to like work through that fog.
Yeah. Okay, so I used like an example when we were doing like something for what was it, the like the second film, like well, oh no, when we were at Portlock for that opening section, because I was like, it's kind of like how like legislation works, right? like like if wording on a law, if you're like trying to propose a law and like the wording is too vague, you don't you don't say, well, we'll just put it in, we'll just put this legislation into law and then we'll worry about the vagueness later. Like, no, 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 no. That's the wrong time to worry about it. The time that you worry about it is before you get to set, before it becomes law. So like before you get to set, before you have equipment out there, before you have cast out there, you want to figure out everything that you really need to do, or like how you can make this not vague and more specific. Because yeah, like not only is it a time thing, but it's also just going to be frustration. You know what I mean? Like you're going to be on set, you're going to be frustrated because you can't move past the barrier, and like I know along with like a lot of people know that like the energy that's happening on that day, if people started getting frustrated and all that other stuff, it can really degrade the quality of what your work could be. So yeah, trying to stay ahead of that by having like a really clear, good storyboard is best. Is tantamount. Um, Number four, clear direction on set. Um, and this kind of goes hand in hand with storyboarding, because naturally, if you have a really clear, good storyboard, then direction should be almost as easy as like kind of like referencing. Like you really shouldn't. When I'm like directing an actor, typically the thing that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to communicate the feeling behind a storyboard that I can see and then I can show. I can be like, this is where you are, this is the lighting, this is kind of the connection that's happening between you and this character, you and this feeling, and I'm trying to communicate things like that. That actually takes some practice. If you are a poet who is not in the video, you're just directing like maybe actors or elements in like the video, then for like that's going to be difficult because now you have to really communicate this thing to people that this work is not connected to. Like these are not people that wrote this work. And if you're in it could even be harder sometimes because you have such a clear idea of what the work is that you kind of the same example what you were talking about as far as like somebody being an expert, but the benefits of maybe learning from somebody who's just past where you are, because like because it's my work, I might not think to explain something, an element that just comes naturally to
Right.
me. You know what I mean? And a lot of times people do need that. So like trying to achieve really good and clear communication and clear direction on set.
Yeah. I don't really have a lot to because it goes back with the
Yeah.
storyboarding too. You know, I think I've listened to or read interviews with some directors. Film isn't my area of expertise, but a lot of times like having an idea of like what the character's motivations are, or what the motivations are for the scene, and kind of making sure that the portrayals and the people portraying it understand that, but then also kind of understanding what to leave open to be like, look, I need the characters by the end of the scene. The characters need to get to the car. How you as actors decide to get there is your choice, but by the end of the scene, we got to be there, and this character needs to be angry, and this character needs to be happy. Or like there was like this one scene. There's like these two characters, and they have to go to a cell phone store, and their job is to just get a cell phone and like as fast as possible. And
Yeah.
the director told the clerk who's working at the cell phone store the only directions that were given to him were to be like, you cannot let these people get this phone quickly.
Mm.
So that was like only like he has to
Yeah.
just find as many things to stall and drag out that whole conversation and things like that. Um, and obviously some scenes might require more direction in that, but I think trying to understand what are the things you're flexible on, what are the things that are firm and that you need, and the more you can voice that, like I know like at least in what I've read from like Jordan Peele, he tends to be relatively open with his actors to be like, okay,
Yeah.
I need this from this scene. How you get there is up to you, but this is what the scene has to have.
Yeah. Very important. And yeah, how loose or how like tight your direction is kind of depending on you as a director, you as a creator for sure. But you have to kind of have it. You have to have like have a modality in one way or the other. So it's like if you're the kind of director that's like, hey, everybody kind of do your own thing, but like you have to like be consistent. You have to be consistent, kind of communicating that. Um, Lastly, and I'm going to say this as far as whether you're the editor or if you're just like kind of the director that's giving things over to an editor, like get familiar with a an editing software. And the big advantage to that, I would say, even for the non-editors, the ones that aren't like doing the editing, is how you're able to communicate things that you want to see in a film. A lot of times you're communicating something to an editor. I'm like I'll send something over to somebody and I'll say like, okay, this is this is like a documentary that I shot like for somebody, like a 15-20 minute documentary. And in that 15-20 minute documentary, there's like, I don't know, and Geoff knows this too. There's like 500 assets that you might have used like throughout this entire thing when it comes to color grading, audio matching, anything. Like anything could be happening in this film. And when you can be as specific as possible when it comes to like, this is a change that I want to see, or this is like a transition that I want to see, or this is, I think we could be a little bit better or tighter here, or in aspects like that. Then the clearer you're going to be able to communicate your like what you want to see on screen. I don't want to say nothing's worse because there's plenty of things that's worse, but I mean something that has happened is you'll have like you like some people will be talking about a film that they worked on, and they'll always have that little girl like, man, this is the film that we worked on, and I'm really proud of this film. It's not exactly what I had in my mind, but this is really really close to it, and a lot of that is attributed to whether or not they could communicate what they really had in their mind clearly to the editor. You know what I mean? You might have the footage, you know what I mean? But a lot of times, because you can't communicate that to the editor, or you don't know how to get into the editing software and kind of figure out exactly precisely what you wanted, then it's really hard for you to, kind of come to your exact vision.
Yeah. Pay for the video editor, like, because otherwise you're going to be getting watermarks and stuff like that, and you're going to miss out on some features that may be really helpful. So it's okay to make an investment. There are watch out for the type of licensing that you get, because a lot of times video editors nowadays are subscription based. We can talk about that later. But it's going to be something that you may have to pay for once a year. But there are ones that you can get lifetime access for. If you're not in a position where you can pay, but you still want to edit, there's DaVinci Resolve, which is powerful. It can do everything that like Premiere does, which is Adobe's video editing. The only thing is it is a very heavy software, so make sure that you have a system that's powerful enough to run it. Otherwise, you may run into overheating and crashing and things like that.
Yeah, I can't tell. There's been a lot of, and I don't want to say this necessarily. I mean, and knock on wood, it doesn't happen to anybody out there or us. But I've seen people that are like they're using like a MacBook Air, but they're using like DaVinci Resolve, which is like,
that's not okay. Not a good combo.
I'm gonna show like I use MacBook too, so this is not me like saying like those are not good. I'm saying that like a MacBook Air is not gonna be the kind of device that you're gonna want to run DaVinci Resolve for like. Yep. And if you have like a small, and also kind of depending on the size of these files too, right? But if you're editing like cinema style footage, 150 gigs, whatever the situation is, it's probably not going to run great for a really long amount of time. So yeah, keeping those things in mind.
Cool.
But that was five quick steps. We're going to get into this a little bit more. I feel like, over the next like week or two, we're going to try to develop some stuff for you guys as far as being able to create a poetry film and things like around your poem. But yeah, ultimately, I mean, poetry film is just another arm in your, kind of creating like kind of dynamic and more expansive like kind of work around your poems. Like it's like, if you can create a film, you can create a booklet, you can create like a coloring book, you can create a calendar, just anything that kind of communicates your work and really helps you kind of expand your brand as an artist is going to be beneficial, long term.
Yeah. Well,
But
like we said, we got some projects coming up. Get excited about.
yeah.
Thank
Poetry conference.
Yeah, poetry conference coming up soon. You guys will be seeing videos from that on the channel in the upcoming weeks. And cool. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us for another edition of Arts and Offers. Arts and Offers. Struggling today. Once again, my name is Geoff.
I'm Matthias.
Hey, we'll see you guys later. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good afternoon.